Look at Wheeler, he is so energetic. Wheeler saving the day with his cleaning skills. We see Wheeler feeling down a bit. Wheeler looks very concerned what's gonna happen. Don't feel down, Wheeler, you can do it. Because you rule with your tools. What's up, everybody? This is Willie, and today I'm going to be reviewing a very interesting spin-off that is somewhat controversial and people don't really seem to have it to high regard, and I do have a lot of understanding for that, and that show is Rubble Crew, which is a spin-off of the main Paw Patrol franchise, and it focuses on the story of Rubble and his family, mainly working with his cousins to build things in Builder's Cove. Now, that whole niche of what the show is about does feel a bit bland, but when watching it, I was left pretty alright with it. Not like the most overtly excited or anything, but it's still something that I was at least interested to watch because I wanted to come in with a bit of an open mind. So I'm okay with this spin-off series, and it's definitely a spin-off that I gravitated to after Rescue Riders ended a few months before this show premiered. And I know I'm making this review a bit late because I'm only going to do this first season in this video, which did end like a whole year ago, and season 2 is already done too, so I'll make a review of that season in a few months. And season 3 is currently airing at the time of this recording, so I might as well get around to doing a review on that season too. As always, before I get into these cartoon show reviews, I would like to do a brief eulogy on the main protagonist of the show. So let's start off with Rubble himself, who's obviously the character that's crossing over from the main franchise, and it's a pretty interesting choice that the show decided to make a spin-off focusing on him, because from what I know, Rubble is not a very highly regarded character, where he would probably be on the bottom of anyone's survey for who their favorite pups are. So I guess maybe the developers recognized that and wanted to try and build a spin-off focusing on him so people can start growing more attachment to Rubble, as he's kind of like taking the spotlight more. So I do get that aspect, but I feel like we got a lot from Rubble from the main franchise anyways, and it would have been more cooler if we did one for Zuma since he's really underused a lot. But anyways, for my thoughts on him, he was just the same as usual, just getting more screen time with him considering he's the central pup of the series, kind of like he's now the Chase-esque figure in this spin-off. So for his own series, he's just fine. I don't have much opinions changed on him anyways, but at least we're getting to know more about him here, which is really unique. So now to the actual characters we're going to be introduced to. And the first pup I'm going to start off with is none other than Wheeler. Because, of course, he's probably the best character from this show by far, since he's kind of like the Marshall-esque character where he has these humorous moments and comes off as the more comedic relief character of the pups, which I gotta say, he's really the only one that stands out when you think about which pup actually brings a lot to the table in terms of humor. And I have a fair share with a lot of the audience too, who find him to be endearing as well. And I know his popularity is warranted for that, but also his breed adds a lot more interesting to the group considering Rubble is a bulldog and his family is supposed to be bulldogs. Wheeler is not. So he adds a bit of a distinction among his family, but still is a fascinating character nonetheless, and probably the only character I actually care about from this series who keeps me captivated to watch it. So yeah, Wheeler's probably the most nuanced character of the bunch, and that's why I would personally watch the show, just because he brings a lot to the table. Then after that, we get to Charger, who, knowing the context after season 1 aired, obviously he did have a crossover to the main franchise, which is pretty interesting that they picked him over Wheeler, but whatever. He's just another character that's fine, do have some moments at points, but I do think the one things that really make him notable is how he unintentionally gives the pups an ideas without even knowing it himself, which you could say he is smart in that sense. Really, he feels like he's more resourceful when it comes to how he's really expressing what he thinks of the situation, which helps the pups get a sense of a solution that they can concept, thanks to what he's talking about at points. So then lastly, we have Mix, who's another character who's just alright, but I do think among the pups, she's definitely the brain of them because she's always the first one to concept a new idea or solution that they could do in a situation that they're facing adversity or needing to seek a solution. So that definitely characterizes her as probably the most smartest of the bunch, and on top of that, her abilities relate to spray painting, aka graphics, which is something that I love because I'm an artist myself, so that's something I can relate to. So now with that over, I can now start reviewing every episode of Rubble Crew Season 1, and throughout it, I'll talk about my overall opinions on certain episodes to share a bit of insight how I think of them, and also, I'll do a little semi-ranking at the end where I'll label which episode is the best and worst from this season. So with that, let's get right into the review. So everything starts off with Ryder and Rubble all alone, and before I continue, I might as well just talk about the animation style as a whole, where it is pretty hideous in my mind. And it's definitely not the greatest when modifying the characters from the main franchise, in which one of them being Ryder, who is an example of that being probably the worst in the design that he's in. So yeah, But anyways, Rubble introduces him to his family, who are all construction pups. And I already introduced some of them to y'all, but I'll run through the rest of the members. We have Motor, who operates a vehicle that can smash. And then we have the parental figures, Aunt Crane and then Grandpa Gravel. And the family goes straight to work constructing something, and that impresses Ryder. Then he gets a call from Mayor Goodway, who then transferred the call to her sister, Mayor Greatway. Wow, what a way to further expand their relations in this spin-off, but Mayor Greatway is okay character, and she's definitely someone notable in this series. But here, Greatway wants to invite Rubble and his family to join the town of Builders Cove, so they can construct things there. And Rubble's family accepts, and they make their way in their vehicles to Builders Cove. So on their way there, the family gets caught up in a traffic jam, who are Builders Cove citizens, and among them, we're introduced to Speedmeister, this series' villain, and boy does he suck just like Magnus from Rescue Riders. We're on bar, he's very cheesy, and his villain role just feels very contrived just for the sake of adding more complexity to the main characters. But overall, I just find Speedmeister to be so nauseating, just stemming from his character and personality. And of course, he's not doing this alone. He's being accompanied by his pet turtle, named Mr. McTurtle. But anyways, the family makes it to where a bridge is supposed to be there crossing over a canyon, but it's not there. And across the canyon, we see Greatway motorcycle her way in and out of the canyon to the other side, where she's accompanied by her own pet. This time is a duck, named Mr. Ducky, who we'll just refer to as Ducky throughout the video. But here, she now instructs the team to build a bridge. But then, Speedmeister butts in and tries to label himself the hero and take the driver's seat of this construction, which whatever, I guess. The crew tries to get some supplies nearby, but they're out, so they head off to gather materials to build the bridge. Meanwhile, Spinoff does his own business and already builds the bridge. And when the crew comes back, they're pretty perplexed by his build. But when the first car tries to cross over it, the bridge is not really stable, and it turns out he didn't freaking use any bolts, which thank you Wheeler for pointing it out. And when you know, without bolts, no stability, the bridge crumbles just like that. So now the crew can start being the real heroes and build a more proper bridge. And they successfully build one that is actually stable, but of course, Speedmeister has to be very jealous, so he tries to hinder their process by using Mix's truck to spray cement all over the crew's construction trucks. But for some reason, I guess his pea-brain didn't check that not every truck was present because Motors was still active and she was able to use her wrecking ball to destroy the cement and free the trucks. And finally, he does get stuck in cement himself, which is good comeuppance for him. So the crew finish up their job and Mix is the one to complete it with spray painting the color of the bridge correlating to the crew's colors, which is definitely a great way to dedicate to them. And so now the citizens make their way across the bridge and now settle themselves in the new town. And the crew themselves get their own home called the Barkyard, which is going to be the main setting of the series moving forward. And we see them settle themselves, and together they create this celebratory performance after they complete their job, which is titled Wiggle and Wag, which is also something that's going to be commonly seen mostly at the end of every episode. And finally, we end off this episode with Rubble saying that his crew is ready for business, so I'm definitely staying tuned for it. So we move forward to the next episode where the crew are now going to build a bike shop. And we start off with some of them at a park building some picnic tables where they make it more like a bike themed by adding pedals to it thanks to Mix's idea. Then the pups witness a kid riding on her baby bike with her father, and then her dad suggesting to get her a much bigger bike, which so happens to be right in front of them. And as they're about to purchase one, it turns out all the biggest bikes have ran out. And a shopkeeper whose name is Shelly, he spots the crew pups and suggests to them to construct a bigger bike shop, and they accept. So they join by Wheeler, grab some construction supplies to build the new bike shop. But unbeknownst to them, they were being spied on by Speedmaster, who obviously overheard everything and wants to try and be the hero again. Not. But he uses his pet turtle to make a ploy as he sneaks onto the back of Wheeler's truck to grab some of the supplies for himself. And at a point, he does finish his build and calls the pups to let them know that he completed it, but he's now stuck because it turns out he didn't create a proper foundation for the structure, so now everything is completely wobbly, which then again, that's how Speedmeister builds. Everything so far that he's made is always not substantial. And so the pups arrive to rescue him, building a slide for him to slide down. Then they wonder how he even got the supplies, which Wheeler quickly figures that it was from his truck, and so he was right. Speedmeister quickly departs the scene as we see his terrible building is about to collapse, which the pups point out that it's lacking concrete. So they quickly fill in some concrete for the foundation to maintain the structure's stableness. And they successfully do. And thanks to them ordering some bigger bikes to deliver, there's now room for more bigger bikes to be purchased. And we see them put to use when they bike around the park. So good job to the crew. And now moving on to the next episode where the crew are now going to be building a big tub. And it begins with Rubble baiting in his own tub, just DJing, because obviously, and then once he's finished, he joins the rest of the pups who are also clean too. And then we learn that they're cleaning themselves up because there's going to be a family photo, and we see Grovel and Crane discuss with them about the upcoming event, and they head out to run a quick errand. So while they're out, the pups are prepping for the photo, but then Motor comes into the story where she's initially clean, but then dirties herself in mud. How lovely. And obviously it's disastrous for the sake of a family photo that's coming up shortly where everyone needs to be on their best look and Motor is just actively not choosing to. Which obviously the crew are trying to help clean her, but she is against it, especially having such a tiff towards having a bath. Which, okay, maybe just give her a shower instead, but nope. So the pups try ways to persuade her to take a bath, with Rubble in particular offering up his rubber duck to her, but it only made her enjoy playing with it instead of playing with it for the sake of what it's for, so that didn't really help. And Motor became more evasive and tried to hide from the pups, but she made the hide and seek game way too easy for her to be found. So with all of that, the pups now make the choice to build a big bathtub for her, which questionable if that's going to even convince her, because the only difference is that it's going to be a much bigger tub than a regular, but oh well, we'll see. And we see them building the tub and the pipes too so that the water can flow through, and Wheeler would happen to open one of the pipe hatches so they could fill the water in, and meanwhile Motor was playing with the rubber duck and she accidentally flung it into the pipe hole, and at the same time the water was just being filled in. So I wonder what's gonna happen here. And we see the duck toy has now caused a clog in the pipes, which is now causing leaks around the pipes, which that's one strong rubber duck to do something like that. But the pups try to fix the leaks, which is like, okay, you can do that, but first get the duck out because it's causing that to begin with. So Mix opens up the pipe and then frees the rubber duck from it, giving it back to Motor. So after this brief ordeal, the pups go fixing up the pipe, and now their what they call super tub is ready for Motor, and it somehow was able to convince her to take a bath, and she actually made her way into the tub and enjoyed bathing in there. So after she cleaned up, Grovel and Crane return, and they are impressed to see Motor bathing in the tub when knowing about her animosity towards it. And after Motor's done, she joins with the rest of the crew to prep for the family photo. And here comes Mayor Greatway to take the photo, and once she does, the photograph is on a nice picture frame and we see the pups playing in the big tub in the background, and that's where it ends off. Next up is where the crew is gonna build an ice cream shop. And what a decent episode it would be where the crew are just dealing with some business at the barkyard, and it so happens to be a windy day that day, which I'm sure there's going to be some relevance is going to play down the road in this episode. So after they're done, they head into town where they see a big long lineup for some ice cream that is being run by a man named Cafe Carl. I'll just call him Carl, and he's obviously overwhelmed by the fact that he's serving a lot of people while operating a ice cream cart. So the crew insists on building an entire ice cream shop for him, and he is delighted by that. So it's time for some construction, and the crew gets their materials they need to build this ice cream shop, which during their build, the windy conditions is causing somewhat minor problems for the pups as some of their materials are almost blown away. Even Wheeler, who's holding one of those flapboards, is nearly carried away in the wind, but Wick saves him. And talking about the flapboards, they are for constructing an ice cream scoop model that we place on the top of the shop as for the aesthetic sake of it. And that ice cream scoop is their last touch for the building, but once they put it on the cone, the strong wind blows it away, and now we get an action sequence of trying to catch this giant ice cream scoop that's rolling around town. And it does nearly collide into kids crossing a street, but the pups are able to catch up to it on time and stop it from doing so, but it still continues to roll away. And after all of this chasing for it, they're able to finally catch it and put it back onto the cone, with this time putting some sticky substance to it so it can stay secure. And now the ice cream shop build is finally complete, and we get another strong gust of wind that the ice drop is able to withstand. But somehow we get this funny scene of Wheeler and Rubble collapsing onto each other after being blown by the wind. But whatever, they now open up the new ice cream shop for Carl to run, and they help him out serve the ice cream to the townspeople. And that's the conclusion right there. Moving on to the episode where the crew are described to fix a Squeak, and we'll see why, as Rubble and Charger are helping out at the barkyard. Then they're given a call from Greatway where she informs them about an important speech she was trying to make, but she continues to get disrupted by some squeaking sounds. So the two are gonna make their way to help out, and they inform Mix and Wheeler about it, which is pretty much it for the content they get, which wow, really getting nothing from Mix and Wheeler especially. So Charger and Rubble make their way to the City Hall where they trace the squeaking noises and they find a mouse peeking through a hole in the wall and they help it out and let it run back outside. Then there's another squeaking noise, this time coming from the bottom, which I guess kind of startled them a bit and caused both Rubble and Charger to flip upside down. But anyways, they remove most of the boards off the ground until they finally find the mouse in there, and it's a tinier mouse who is struggling to get out, which Rubble and Charger do help it out and they free it outside to join the other mouse they rescued. Then there's one final squeak noise that's coming from above, so the two pups make their way to the roof of the building, and well, you know, they find the other mouse there. Which by piecing things together, you can realize that these mouses are a family together and they have been separated from each other when they got lost, I guess, in the building. So the pups heroically saved them and reunited them again. So now that that last mouse is out of the building, there won't be any interruptions with Great Way's speech now. But the pups do see the mouse family really like the City Hall building, so they decide to construct a mini-sized version of the City Hall that is catered towards the mouse family. And after that, the mayor can finally make her speech to the townspeople and then top it off with a fireworks show, which was a nice little touch there at the end. So that was cool. So for the next episode, the crew is now going to build a playground where it starts off with some of the pups building a fence around a grocery store that is owned by a guy named Gabriel. And then for some reason, Gabriel just twists around and then accidentally knocks down the entire fence around his store. However, the pups reuse the broken pieces to construct a new fence, and they're able to make it more stable this time. So then, they're making their way back, and they happen to see a gathering, which they do spot Motor and Crane among them, so they join in on what this gathering is, and what they see is a new playground being constructed by none other than Speedmeister. And of course, the kind of playground he makes is not very stable, which is typical of his sort of builds. Which I will say here, I haven't really dwelled properly on what Speedmeister's characteristics is, that the fact that he's always trying to be the hero in these situations but ultimately fails, which can label him more on the anti-hero spectrum. And also, he does embrace a lot of jealousy when he sees the pups pull out the successes more so than what he can do, which in turn, he would try sabotaging their plans in order for him to regain that spotlight again. So looking at the character that Speedmeister is evoking is mostly the attention-seeking side of things, wanting to be the one gaining the praise for any of his work, which all of them he does are deemed either unsafe, unstable, and on top of that, sloppy. So back to the episode, we see here that he did a sloppy job constructing the playground as it's not properly put together, and we see here once Motor plays around in the merry-go-round, it detaches from the playground and begins destroying it as it twirls around it. And I guess Motor was too occupied by the fun that she didn't notice the colossal damage the merry-go-round is causing. So the crew chases after it and are able to retrieve it and put it safely in Wheeler's truck. With Speedmeister looking at the devastating sight of his destroyed build, he withdraws from the scene. And so we thought was the end of his role in the episode, but nope. We see the pups reuse the broken pieces to reconstruct the playground in a much better version than what Speedmeister could make. And as they're finishing up, they are also making a tire swing, which is cool. And unbeknownst to them, Speedmeister is spying on them, who is expressing his jealousy of their successes. So he tries to make this attempt to completely sabotage them. And his first move is on the tire swing. But I guess his Peter didn't realize he didn't have much time to do so, as the crew were getting the kids to come over in just seconds. So he tries to hide inside the tire that he just removed the bolts from, and it comes off and starts rolling around the playground, which the crew sees him inside and start to chase after it to save him. And so we get another chase sequence that ends the same way, where they're able to catch it and put it in Wheeler's truck. And Spinoff also tries to beat around the bush for a sec before confessing that he did try to take down their build, so he quickly leaves the scene, and then the pups join in with the kids to play around the playground. And that's where it ends. Afterwards, we get to an episode where the crew are gonna fix a roof. And we start off the episode at the barkyard where the crew is just mixing some games, and then we see one in particular being a ring toss, and which Motor happens to toss one that lands on Charger's tail, in which Wheeler pointed out as tailed it instead of nailed it. And also, speaking about Wheeler, he shows up this cool vacuum feature that is equipped with his gear that he uses, and it blows back Motor when he tests it out. So then we cut to the mayor inside City Hall making some food, which would be chili, and then suddenly the roof starts to cave in a bit on her. So then she calls for the crew to help fix the roof, and they make their way to the City Hall. And when they inspect what's on the roof, they discover an eagle who they name Wingsy residing there in a giant nest where she happens to have laid 3 eggs. So for their next plan, Wheeler and Charger opt to take Wingsy and her eggs to another location while Rubble and Mix stay behind to fix the roof. And so the plan commences, and we see both sides doing some really good work with their roles in this plan, where Rubble and Mix have an easy time repairing the roof with no real intrigue because they had a much easier job. However, for Wheeler and Charger, there is a bit more intrigue with their side where they make their ways to a far location. Then while driving, there happens to be a fallen tree on the road, which Wheeler makes a sudden sharp turn, which causes one of the eagle's eggs to fall onto a tree branch. So Wheeler and Charger work together to retrieve that egg back, where thanks to Wheeler's vacuum, is able to blow the egg towards Charger's direction so he can grab it with his claw. And then they see some logs and use it to build like a wood platform so that they could put it in a tree where Wingsy can stay on to keep her eggs warm. And when they're done, they place it on the tree and Wingsy occupies it. Then they make their way back to the City Hall where, to celebrate their dedication to repairing the roof damages, the pups get to try out the chili that Greatway was making earlier before the ordeal happened. And that pretty much concludes it, with Rubble's family enjoying this chili feast. And now the next episode, the crew is now going to build a car wash, which this one is the most exciting because it's a Wheeler-centric episode. Alright, so this episode starts off with the crew just complete the construction of some sideline benches because there's a big race that's going to take place, which is a yearly event that is done. And one of those racers who are participating is Speedmeister, and he just brags about winning considering speed is in his name and claims that everyone will cheer him on and stuff like that, which is like, okay, sure, I guess. But then he speeds off, and then out comes Mayor Greatway on her motorcycle, whom is also participating in the race, and she wants to do another practice round so she can be in full preparation for it. But then we see that Speedmeister was spying and wants to try sabotaging Greatway's chances of even participating, and there happens to be dirt on the road, so he just pours water on it to mix it into mud, which ends up being in the path that Mayor's Greatway is taking, and she spots a mud puddle but is unable to stop on time, causing her to run over it and completely mess up her motorcycle, which although it is dirty, it also affected its functioning too. And this is where Wheeler gets his time to shine because he's a clean guy. His suggestion is to make a car wash. So to construct a car wash, and I just absolutely love Wheeler's enthusiasm when they were constructing this. And then they finish it off filling up a barrel tank with some soap, which is the main course that cleans up the vehicles. And what do you know? Guess who's spying on them? Speedmeister. And he takes his chance to sabotage again, this time replacing the soap and filling cement and dirt inside the tank. And what a disaster it was going to be, as we see Greatway's motorcycle go through the car wash and out it comes completely cement solid, much to everyone's shock, especially Wheeler. And he is obviously devastated since this ain't the result that he would want. And I really do feel bad for him, especially he gives off this really tangible line of, "Getting things clean is what I do best, but not today," which is very devastating. But then the pups discover the cement and dirt inside the tank, and they're able to trace back some evidence that Speedmeister left behind, which blatantly made him the culprit because the evidence he left behind was a bag with his face on it. So this at least eased the pups' worry that the washer didn't work out. It's not that, it was just tampered with. So to reevaluate, they can just involve the structure of the car wash a bit, so it can relegate to both washing the vehicle and removing all the hard layer particles on them. So they construct a much bigger car wash, and they send Greatway's motorcycle through again, and this time it's successfully clean and it is working again. So Greatway makes her way to participate in the race, which so happens to be starting the minute she was arriving at the starting line, which is much to Speedmeister's shock. And the race is pretty close between the two, but the same mud puddle, which I guess has not been cleaned up for some reason, is spotted by both Speedmeister and Greatway, where the former tries to get her to run through it again, but this time Greatway makes a savage move and just gets her motorcycle to spring over the puddle and cross the finish line first, winning the race. And for better comeuppance, Speedmeister's truck ends up running over the mud. Then he's confronted by Greatway and the pups, who obviously demand an apology out of him, and he does say he's sorry. Which again, is he though, when he's gonna continue doing stuff like this? Yeah, I don't buy it. But anyways, Greatway is awarded the trophy for winning the race, and that's where the episode ends off. Now we move on to the next episode, where it focuses on the crew planning a day for their grandpa, which we'll see how, as it starts off on another very windy day. How lovely. And then we see Gravel offering up some kibble pops to the pups, but one of the hinges on his door panel is loose and it completely shuts on Gravel, which he goes outside to replace the hinge, in which in doing so, we see him take out a lot of doorknobs out of his toolbox, which we'll see how relevant that will be. But he does find a hinge and fix it on his panel, and then he serves the pups the pops, who are all expressing their appreciation for him and want to make a day dedicated to him. So they play some activities with him, but then they are interrupted by a call from Gabriel, whose grocery store entrance was impacted by the wind where a tree branch fell on it, so he needs the crew's help to deal with it. And one by one here, we see each pup leave to deal with it, only to need more members to help every time they proceed into the next stage of dealing with the mess, which lessens the numbers of pups who can spend time with Gravel, and it gets to the point where he's the only one by himself, which I do feel bad for him, but he was okay with it since he does personally prioritize the help before himself. And the crew is almost done with fixing the mess, but there's only one more issue, in that the grocery door knob came loose, so there's no way you can enter unless you replace the doorknob, which seeing Gravel's doorknobs earlier in the episode, that definitely meant something, and he was called over to help, and his smart brain also brought a doorknob to fill in as the replacement for the grocery door, and it's now open and everyone waiting can go inside, and the crew's mission is complete. Although they do express their sympathy that they couldn't spend some good time with Grandpa Gravel because this task went in their way. However, Gravel was fine with it. Plus, Gabriel was so thankful for the pups' help that he offered them some cheese and kibbles to snack on, which is even better to celebrate their Grandpa Day, and they all hug it out at the end, and which is a great way to conclude the episode. Next episode, the crew is going to build a skate park, and it's a very interesting episode where it starts off with Wheeler dumping out some old materials he collected, which Motor decides to play with one of them as if she was like surfing or something. But it gives Mix an idea that they could make a skateboard out of the plank that Motor was using, so they make a skateboard, and once they're done, the first person who actually gets to use it is Crane, who shows off her skateboarding skills because she used to be a pro skateboarder. Wow. And Grandpa presents a presentation of Crane's skateboarding past, which the pups would love to see her do it again, but unfortunately in Builder's Cove, there's no skate park, which conveniently, since they're construction pups, why don't they make one themselves, which they will do. And they want this to be a surprise as well. But speak of the devil, Crane arrives, which they quickly turn off the screen and act like they're planning out something else, where they invoke this beautiful lie that they're going to be constructing a duck pond, which, I mean, you can't because it's from nature. But I guess Crane didn't really think too much of it. But she did insist to come along, which Gravel stops her and suggests she and more help with him making a 5-layer cake. So they go make a cake while the pups go make a surprise skate park. So they find an empty field and they extract some of the ground. Then Mix proceeds to pour cement inside, which unbeknownst to any of the pups, which I don't know why none of them were paying attention, a family of ducks make their way into the hole, which Mix and Rubble do save, but at the same time, Mix left her lever on, which poured out all the cement into the hole, and it just creates some lumps. And furthermore, she has no more left as well, so that adds more complexity to the situation. However, after some thought process, they figured they can use some of the reused items that Wheeler dumped out earlier to add on the last touches for the skate park. But they have to get it from the barkyard, which obviously involves them not being caught. So there's a little fun heist sequence of them just getting the items, and they're able to do it sneakily without Crane catching them. And after that, they finish off the build for the skate park, and it is complete. So they head back to bring over Crane and everyone else, who also finished their cake, which this is definitely a good addition to the surprise. So when Crane arrives at the skate park, she is very delighted by the sight of it and skateboards around it, with some kids joining along to watch. And then lastly, to celebrate, the pups digging on the 5-layer cake, so that ends it off. Next up, the crew is going to build a tunnel, which is definitely an episode that is kind of Charger-centric in a way, where he's a big fan of a celebrity singer named Sierra Sparkles, and she's going to be coming over to the town to sing. And we see Charger's superfan nature come upon him, and he's just non-stop enthusiastic about the upcoming concert. Then they go to see Gabriel, who then gets a call from Sierra, and she breaks the news that her tour bus cannot continue going on the only path that she can go on because there's a giant boulder in the way. So the pups quickly make their way to Sierra's location to help her out. And first off, Charger obviously wants to introduce himself to her since he's their biggest fan, and afterwards, the pups try to get the boulder out of the way, but they're unable to nudge it, so they resort to the next idea, which is to break it apart. And because Mora loves to break things, she's perfect for this job. So she arrives and tries to break the boulder open, but in doing so, the impact begins to shake her surroundings, which causes a landslide of rocks and create a bigger barricade in the path. So the pups rethink their next plan, and after Charger sings some of Sierra's songs, they figure an idea that they can break through the interior of the rocks instead and build a tunnel. So Crane is called over to supply them some materials. They get it and start extracting through the pile of rocks, and the tunnel is constructed, and they add some materials on it to ensure its stability. And now Sierra's tour bus can finally make it through and arrives at the stage where everyone is scattered, and allows the pups to be on stage for her as a way to thank them for their help. And they do their performance, and that's where the episode ends off. Then we jump forward to the next episode where the crew builds a beaver home, which feels like a by the numbers episode, and it begins with the crew constructing a disco setting for them to dance for the night. But then, just as when Rubble's about to play the music, the lights and music shuts off, so does all the power in Builder's Cove does. So now all the electricity has been cut, which is really mysterious for it to happen. And once Motor does point out to Crane about one of the utility poles vanishing, that's when there's a culprit that's been taking them. So the crew goes on a little mystery hunt to find the missing utility poles, which turns out multiple of them around town has been taken as well. And then they finally make their way near a stream where they see the culprit being a beaver, who are using the utility poles to make a home for himself because they're made of wood. And the crew does name the beaver Crunchy, and unfortunately for the beaver, he's gonna need to essentially give up the poles since it's needed for the town's power. So then the crew comes up with the idea that they can make Crunchy a home for himself since they're construction pups, obviously. So they head back to the barkyard to make some quick work and build a beaver's home as the sun is setting. And once sun is down, it does get a little bit more darker. So the crew start using flashlights, which is really nice. So it takes until the night sky hits for them to finally complete the beaver's home build. And they bring it over to the stream where Crunchy's at, and they present this building to him, and he takes some time inspecting both the exterior and interior of the building before officially settling himself inside of the home, which I did love the suspense along the way, just seeing the pups' reactions and their faces expressing a full range of emotions, just watching Crunchy examine their building. So now that Crunch has a home for himself, he returns the power poles to the pups, and they put it back in town, and the power is restored. And with that, we can see the pups get back into the business that they were doing earlier, which was doing their little disco dance. And that culminates this episode right there. We then continue on to the next episode where the crew fixes a road. And it starts off with the pups and everyone else in town helping each other out, which Greatway spots and is very satisfied with how civil everyone has been with each other, that she wants to now honor them in some way. Which the pups have an idea that they should have a helpers parade, and that idea is settled. So everyone's invited to join in the parade, but lo and behold, who else wants to be invited? Speedmeister. So he tries to take an opportunity to persuade Greatway in letting him participate in the parade, and he tries to show his book of his previous builds to present the evidence that he has been so helpful when he's anything but. And Greatway obviously refuses unless he actually does something helpful for anyone. Then he can participate in the parade. But she's talking to Speedmeister, who thinks the opposite way of things, where he believes helping things out essentially involves him causing the damage himself in order to do so. Because we see here destroying the main street of the road, so that way he can be the one fixing it up to guarantee his spot in the parade. And guess what? He would have not even been in it anyway since the parade was already starting, and they so happen to be approaching the broken road, which they quickly stop right before they hit it. And the pups go to inspect it just as Speedmeister arrives to try and repair his own damage with cement that he makes. But his mixture is absolutely poor, and his cement doesn't solidify right away as he pours it onto the damaged road. And everyone points out that it is unsafe, but he tries to deny it and tests out his cement himself, which only gets his vehicle stuck. And then with the weight of his vehicle on top of the damaged road, it causes it to sink into the ground. So this pretty much further sunk his chances of getting a spot in the parade. The pups get to work fixing this damage, first getting Speedmeister out of the hole thanks to Charge's claw, and then the rest of the crew repair the road and paint over it. So now it has been fixed, but we have to have one more sequence with Speedmeister, who does spill out that he was the culprit that destroyed the road. Then afterwards, the crew join in on the parade to end off the episode. The next episode is where the crew builds a popcorn cafe, and it starts off with them at the barkyard dealing with some stuff under a very humid day. Then they get a call from Carl, who is preparing the town some popcorn, and he wants the crew to build a popcorn cafe. They accept the plan and make their way to the location where Carl wants his cafe to be built, which when the pups arrive at the destination, they themselves are pretty puzzled by the choice of location Carl made, where besides the empty field, the only thing that's there is a giant pot, which turns out to have kernels inside. Then we get a very silly moment where Carl just pops from behind the pot just saying hello, which somehow just startled the pups and they all just scream and just collapse onto the ground. Anyways, Carl explains to them what the pot is for and asks them to build a cafe around it. So he leaves off the crew to deal with it, and they get to work building the cafe, where the walls just resemble what a popcorn box would look like. And continuing on the storyline with the hot weather, it is taking a toll on them, and we see them occasionally drink water. And we do get a segment where Wheeler is sipping on them and he starts to hear some popping sounds, which, oh boy. And after the crew finish building the foundation of the structure, they hear the popping noise again, and I just love how Wheeler's like saying pop when he pointed out hearing it before. And what do you know, the popping noise came from the kernels that are turning into popcorn. And wow, Carl had so much kernels that they made huge piles of popcorn around the cafe, and it's all thanks to the hot sun causing it to do so. And Carl does come back and witness this disaster occur alongside the building walls just collapsing, which luckily no one got hurt or even was in the way. But now there's a big mess of popcorn. But the crew find a way to resolve the situation, and of course, because Wheeler's a clean pup, he's hyped to discard all the popcorn mess around town. While he does that, the other pups fix up the building structure again and top it off with a roof that resembles popcorns, because obviously. And now that that's complete, the remaining popcorn in the pot are ready for serving, and the citizens gather around to get some. And the pups themselves get some popcorn too, and they all indulge on it, which is the ending of the episode. Then after that, the next episode is where the crew fixes a slippery mess. And it starts off at the barkyard where Wheeler is operating his truck and is trying to give some supplies, but there's oil spill in his way, and when his truck rolls over it, it slips and rolls Wheeler inside in circles before stopping. So to reduce this slippery effect, the crew have an idea to pour sand over it, which that's definitely going to be a useful material moving forward with situations like this, and it definitely shows a bit of science there too. So then, the crew gets a call from Greatway, who's announcing that she's getting a special picture day dedicated to mayors like her. And the pup suggests that her picture should be something that's very epic, like her on a motorcycle doing a stunt. And she accepts that idea, and so the crew builds a ramp just for her. And when they finish making it, Mix adds the final touch, a spraying paint on it, which they don't even wait for it to dry, and they already get Greatway to try riding on it with her motorcycle, and when she does, the wet paint messes up her momentum. It also ruins the paintwork on the ramp too. So the pups go ahead and wash it, and Mix uses her machine to spray bubbly soap on it, and for some reason she leaves her vehicle unattended to just check out the bubbly soap's effect, which proves to be a pretty colossal mistake as we see Wingsy the eagle come around and just start mashing the buttons impulsively, causing bubbly soap to spray all over town, and now everything is slippery. So Wheeler tries to help out and clean up the mess, but the slipperiness of it is making it too impossible for him to get any sort of progress, so he quickly pivots and returns to the crew. And then they come up with the idea that they did earlier, which was using the sand to eliminate the slippery effect, which they make their way back to the barkyard, where it's also drowned in bubbly soap. And the pups learn that there's no more sand at the barkyard, but they can smash up a boulder that can create sand. And they have Mix pull a lever that smashes the giant boulder into sandy pieces. They scoop it up, display it on the soap all around town. which has eliminated all the slippery mess that has been made. And there was one humorous sequence where Gabriel was just non-stop slipping on the soap while he finally got out of that mess once the sand was distributed, but there happened to be a banana peel on the sand and he slipped on it instead. But anyways, the sand has helped clear up all the bubbles and the crew repair and repaint the ramp, and the whole town gathers to watch Waterway drive her motorcycle up the ramp in order to get a beautiful photo of her doing it mid-performance, and Rubble is able to take that picture and is now on the frame in the city hall, and that's where the episode ends off. Move on to the next episode, where it is about the pups building a drive-in theater. And it starts off with Mix and Motor cosplaying as superheroes because they're ready to watch their favorite show about a superhero squirrel. Then the pups get a call from Waterway, who requests for the pups to build a movie theater because the town is going to gather around to watch the premiere of a movie about the superhero squirrel, the same one that Mix and Motor were just watching. So they get all their materials and make their way to the empty lot to start building this movie theater. And when they're done finishing, they run into a bit of a roadblock where the movie screen they're given is too big to fit inside of the theater. So now the pups are in a bit of a pickle because time is running out, where a demolition process just for the sake of resizing for the new screen is going to take longer and will be way past the deadline for the premiere of the movie. And Waterway arrives to learn of this news and sadly decides to now make the announcement that the movie night has been cancelled. So then before the demolition process is even commenced, Meg left her superhero cape inside the theaters, and when she goes to retrieve it, she spots a skylight in the ceiling, which gives her the idea that the crew can continue further with the demolition process, but the way they can rebuild this theater is to not even make a building structure for it, just have the screen be outdoor, like a drive-in theater instead. And the crew are satisfied with her idea and go through with her plan. And they report to Waterway about the idea, which she quickly spreads word of around town. And after that, they finish building their drive-in theater, and everyone in town gathered to watch the premiere of this superhero squirrel movie, and that's where the episode ends. Then for the next episode, it is about the crew finding a rainbow treasure, which was a pretty thrilling episode, and it starts off with Rubble trying to find his missing wrench with his family. Then Charger digs up something that isn't a wrench, instead an unusual object, which is a green gemstone with a riddle imprinted on it, which is like, wow, that's been there for a long time and not one of them noticed that until they digged it up. Like, wow. And then that's where Grovel makes his explanation about the specialties of these gemstones, where they help mark the spot of the location of a special rainbow treasure. But first, they need all 4 gemstones together, plus it has to be done before sundown. Oh yeah, and by the way, talking about Rubble's wrench, it turns out Grovel had borrowed it for a bit and returned it to him once the pups undug the gemstone. But anyways, back to the main point. The other gemstones are hidden around town, but obviously they didn't have no idea where the location is, so in order to find it, they must use the reference of the riddles on the gemstones they find in order to find the next one. And they start off with the green one, because obviously, and it gives us the riddle that the next gemstone is located around the top of the mountain. So they embark on the adventure and they find the next gemstone, which is red, and the riddle it has guides them to the next location, which is at a garden. And when they dig it up, they find a yellow stone, and it comprises the final riddle that leads them to the last stone, which is inside a lake. So Charger uses his claw to pick it up, and it is a blue stone. And now that they found all the stones, they put it in Wheeler's truck because that's where he's been carrying it, and they make their way back home. But on their way back, some ducks cross the street, which causes them to slam on the brakes so aggressively, and for Wheeler's sake, the stones in his truck collide into each other, breaking into pieces, and they find out about it once they head home. But come on, they're construction pups, so they can just fix it together, and they use concrete to place the pieces back together again. And after that, they combine all the stones with each other, and the sun ray shines off of it and bounces its ray onto the location of the treasure. So the crew makes their way there, and they find an X marks the spot and dig up a treasure chest, and inside are just golden tools. So then they align the tools together, which creates the rainbow. And it was a beautiful visual, which is a great way to end off the episode. Now we move on to the next episode called The Crew Builds a Pig Barn, and this one's very exciting for me because it's another episode that centers on Wheeler but also his character development with an interesting dynamic that would be established in this episode. So it starts off with the pups meeting with a farmer named Zoe, whom is setting up a party for citizens to come over in honor of a pig that she owns named Truffles, and the introduction of Truffles really catches Wheeler's eyes, and this starts their dynamic relationship moving forward in this series, which I will say is very compelling, and also develops Wheeler's character along, where we already know how fun of a character he is, being the only one probably, and this adds a new element to his character that I really like. But anyways, Zoe needs a pig barn to be constructed, and the pups are just the right pups to make one, and they go to construct a pig barn at Zoe's farm. And they finish off with the paint work, which Mix allows Truffles to select the color, and she prefers pink because she is pink. And so while Mix goes and spray paints the barn, I just love this little brief sequence of Wheeler and Truffles just playing around with each other, further developing their friendly chemistry bond. And on top of that, once the barn is complete, Wheeler volunteers to clean up the mess inside it just for the sake of appealing Truffles. And once he's done, Truffles makes her first entry into her new pig barn, and she just doesn't look very appeased by the spotless nature of it, which everyone does notice, and it leads to another very fun line from Wheeler that I just keep replaying in my head, where he said, "Is it not clean enough? It's not perfect? Are we missing something?" Which that alone really is just what tops off Wheeler's dynamic with Truffles, is that he puts in so much care for her appeals that he'll find any ways to satisfy her. And then Truffles suddenly disappears once everyone's back is on her, and they go on a search hunt for her, where they eventually find her near the river just swimming in a pit of mud, which obviously common sense, pigs love mud. Which, although dirty is the opposite of what Wheeler desires, he's still accepting of it because it's what Truffles desires and he likes her, and everyone learns that Truffles is happy because she loves mud, and that's what was missing in the pig barn. So they grab Truffles and bring her back to the barn, where the citizens are gathered there for the party, and the barn door is opened up with a new creation the pups built just for Truffles, which is a slide leading into a pool of mud, and Truffles inspects it, which this sequence felt like a callback to when Chucky was inspecting his home, and just like Crunchy, Truffles is satisfied and slides into the pool of mud, and the pups join her as well, and that's where the episode ends. Then for the next episode, that describes the crew building a runway, and it's a special day for Motor because it is her birthday. And the pups tried to make it a surprise for her, but unfortunately, she does eavesdrop, and thanks to Charger accidentally slipping it out, she does have full knowledge about her birthday party. However, the good thing is that she's unaware of the gift that she's getting, which is being delivered, and it's being delivered by Camilla, who we've seen delivered stuff to the pups in the past, and this time she's not delivering it in her truck because the gift is too big to fit in, so she's operating a plane to get there, which is reasonable, but at the same time, did you even check if your plane is too large for the runway? Yeah. So that alerts the pups to head over to the airport and construct a big runway so Camilla can land her plane on it. So they expand the runway to make it bigger than the original, but by the time they're done, the day dawns and it gets darker, which is harder for Camilla to find it, which is also delaying Motor's gift to be given on time. But the crew are resolute on making sure Motor gets her gift, and they come up with the idea of building runway lights so it can brighten up the area for Camilla to see. Once they finish building it, Camilla spots it and makes her landing. And now that she's landed, she can now unload Motor's gift from her plane, and that is a giant rubber duck that can actually illuminate too. Like what I would describe a duck lantern. And in addition to that, Motor's party has been set up there too, with all of her friends there as well. So everyone wishes Motor a happy birthday, and that's the end of the episode. Then for the next episode, we have a very special one, where it is our first pup crossover from the main franchise, where we're gonna have Marshall visit Builder's Cove, and obviously it's in essence for the theme of this episode, which is where the crew are gonna build a fire station. And starts off with the pups meeting Greatway, where she commands them to make a fire station, which Rubble obviously knows is something his friend Marshall likes, and Motor is a big fan of him. So what do you know? The man himself arrives in his fire truck, Marshall the fire pup. And for a nice little callback to the main series, his introduction starts off with him acting clumsy, which is typical of him. But anyways, he meets Rubble's family and is hyped for the upcoming build of a fire station. And in addition to that, he's going to be labeling someone as volunteer captain, which is a cool little touch there at the end. So while the crew head off to get some supplies, Speedmeister was eavesdropping. Oh, for goodness sakes. And unsurprisingly, his now motivation is to ensure that Marshall labels him as volunteer fire captain, so he'll take any opportunity he has to gain that labeling. So then the crew come back and build the fire station, and once it's complete, Marshall takes the time inspecting the interior of the station, and he's pretty delighted by it. And then we have some fun moments, starting with Rubble and Motor just humorously bumping into him. Then Marshall, as clumsy as always, walking straight into the fire pole like he had not seen that there. And then on top of that, Motor jumping from the fire pole and colliding into him. But after that, Marshall gets his fire truck to park inside, and he's able to. Then the pups get a call from a citizen named Omer who's with his family that was hiking in the forest, and they spot some fire. How convenient that was. But while they're occupied with Omer's screen call, Speedmeister took his chance to sabotage the pups by pouring cement on the garage door, which effectively locks Marshall's fire truck inside, which what a disaster that is. And when the pups try to open the garage door, they can't open it and thought that they installed a faulty garage door, which why don't you go inside and check? And next thing you know, Speedmeister chimes in with a firefighter outfit he stole from them and volunteers to deal with the fire, so he makes his way to the forest. But the crew do not approve of Speedmeister's ability, and they find ways to adjust the situation and opt to deal with it with their construction trucks instead, because it can be useful with dealing fire too, and Marshall is satisfied with it and joins along with them for the ride. So then the family is waiting for Marshall to arrive, but instead it's Speedmeister, much to their disappointment, and what do you know? Speedmeister becomes a disappointment himself because his truck does not work. Good thing is that Rubble and his crew were on their way, and they actually have functioning trucks that can actually help out the situation, and they are able to put out the fire. So after it's been extinguished, they have to go another way out since the ashes really burned up the place. So they come across the river, and Motor, who has been very down with how much she has not contributed much to this adventure, finally gets her spotlight as she uses her wrecking balls to knock down some trees that are long enough to bridge over the river. And by the way, Speedmaster tries to do his own ways by driving his truck onto a raft that just gets stuck in the middle of the river. But anyways, Motor's solution works, and she also helps get Speedmeister unstuck too. So now that everyone has gotten across, Speedmeister tries to go on a spiel that he is deserving of praise for trying to save the day when he did anything but and had zero effort into it as well. And he just wouldn't shut up about it, and eventually slips out that he was the one that sabotaged the garage door by sealing it with cement, which everyone is ashamed that he would do such a thing, and he eventually apologizes and leaves, which good, you better go. And then they head back to the fire station to eliminate that concrete cement from the door, and after that, Marshall is able to drive his truck out of the station, and he lines up everyone to elect who he believes is the best fit for volunteer captain, and he chooses Motor, which is great for her after how much she expressed her superfan nature of him, and also her solution that helped get everyone out of the forest. And lastly, they introduce Marshall to their wiggle and wag celebratory tradition they do at the end, and they all do it together, but at the end, we get one more callback that Marshall does in the main franchise, which is his wipe outs, and he does one right here as he somehow trips and collides into the crew. And that's definitely a way to end an episode involving Marshall, so good on them for doing the best they can with it. Next up is the episode where the crew do a home renovation, and this one's pretty interesting, where it starts off with Rubble and Mix watching a show about a construction man named Hank Hammer, who helps out construct things obviously, and then their show is interrupted by a call from Shelly, who wants the pups to come over to his house to do something, which he continues to get interrupted with calls in related to his workplace, so he's unable to explain to the pups what he needs help with. So first, Rubble and Mix arrive there, and who else is going to be there? Hank Hammer with his filming crew. Wow. And I just love how Rubble just expresses his superfan side of thing and just can't think straight. But anyways, Shelly is very busy with his bike shop that he's seemingly forgetting what he needs the pups to help him with. Which then, why did you even call if you don't remember? Next time remember before you call, dude. Anyways, with no real thought of what Shelly wants, the pups try to make guesses of what they can try and repair, and they first start out with Shelly's front door. And while they're fixing it, Hank's team films their process. Then once they're complete, they present the new door to Shelly, who happens to come back. But despite his satisfaction, that's not exactly what he wanted, so there's more work for the pups to do, and this time they have an idea to fix Shelly's window and replace it with a mosaic pattern that resembles a bicycle, because obviously he's a bike shop owner, and it perfectly fits in with the theme of his character. And he is delighted by it, but it's still not what he's looking for. But this time, he finally remembers what he wanted the pups to do, in that he needed them to move his home closer to his shop so he wouldn't constantly have to run back and forth from home to work, which that is just him trying to ask for convenience. But in addition to the idea of moving an entire home, Hank Hammers now wants to contribute, which finally he's doing something. And furthermore, Wheeler and Charger are involved too, and those two get to meet Hank Hammer as well, much to their excitement. So then the crew move Shelly's home to a location that's close to his bike shop, and they safely implement it in the empty lot, which that's very impressive. You move an entire house there, but also just applying some logic. I'm wondering how much it affected the utilities of the home, which I guess the pups might have reinstalled in the new location, but still. It's an interesting aspect that I wanted to point out here, so yeah. But anyways, the crew has completed their mission alongside now getting some fame through Hank's show, so that's even better, and that's how the episode ends off. Next, the following episode is where the crew builds a lighthouse, and it begins with the pups smoothing out the road on the bridge, which they then bump into Greatway, who tells them that she's going to have a sister reunion with Goodway, which is cool to see another crossover from the main franchise. But there's an issue. The asphalt that the pups displayed on the bridge earlier is going to be wet for a while until it dries up by the end of the day. But the pups find an idea to adjust to the situation, and they call Captain Turbot, another character crossing over to the show. But he's going to pick up Goodway and sail her to Builder's Cove. So that's going to be good. However, on their way there, it's very foggy, and they call the pups to report about their issue. And so it gives the pups the idea to build a lighthouse to help them out. So they head over to the beach and build a lighthouse, and they get it done just like that. But considering it's very early in the episode, something's gonna happen, and that is the case when some waves sog up the sand near the lighthouse, causing it to lean forward, which is like, wow, a lighthouse version of the Tower of Pisa. Definitely something. So now they're in a bit of a crisis with the lighthouse tipped forward and the light shining the wrong way. So all the pups think of how to fix the solution. Grovel arrives with some food, and he happens to bring out a bowl that is overloaded with kibbles that lean forward just like the lighthouse. And seeing that gives the pups an idea that they can build a foundation structure around the lighthouse so it can protect them from any turmoil from the waves. And they build this protective structure and reposition the lighthouse straight back up. And now it is shining in the right direction again, which Captain Turkbot finally can see and almost runs into some rocks for some reason. I don't know how he didn't see it there. But he's able to arrive safely on shore with Goodway, and she and Greatway reunite, which shows the strong sisterly bond they have. And this is exactly the resolution for the episode. Moving on to the crew builds a dinosaur museum, and it begins with the crew spending time at the park. Then they find a nearby area that is predominantly dirt, and Charger and Motor go and dig through some of the dirt with Wheeler right behind them. And I just love this funny visual of Wheeler trying to dodge every dirt flying towards him, and even standing on hind legs trying to avoid getting dirt on his fur. But then Charger and Motor dig up something, and thanks to Wheeler's vacuum, that something is a dinosaur bone. Which, how much relics are gonna be buried around the setting of Builder's Cove? Like, that is no coincidence. But the rescue crew accompanied them and discovered the skeleton they dug, and they identified that dinosaur to be a velociraptor. And from Rubble's perspective, he would personally want to see a T-Rex, which I'm sure his wish will come true soon. So then, Greatway arrives and learns of the pup's amazing find, and she suggests that the skeletons should be held in an exhibit, which leads to the idea that a dinosaur museum should be built. So most of the crew head off to construct the dinosaur museum in the middle of town, leaving Wheeler and Charger behind to dig for more dinosaur fossils, and they eventually would find another one identified as a Stegosaurus, and they call the pups to let them know about their next find, which you do see Rubble being hopeful it was a T-Rex, which unfortunately this time it wasn't, but there's still hope. And then Wheeler and Charger find another dinosaur fossil, and it's finally one that's belonging to a T-Rex, and they call back Rubble to let them know about the third fossil they find, but this time not telling him what the identity of the dinosaur being, just for the sake of surprising Rubble with it. Then while they're on the call, they hear the citizens arriving at the museum, which is still half built, so they quickly get to completing their work, and they do. And at the same time, Charger and Wheeler are now carrying all the dinosaur skeletons covered around town, which some people see and are just frightened by the sight of it without even knowing what's under the sheets. And when they arrive at the museum, they uncover the dinosaur fossils, which the T-Rex in particular is the one that surprised Rubble the most, and he's fascinated by it. Unfortunately, the T-Rex is way too tall, so the crew needs to make some adjustments to the rooftop that leads to the idea that they don't need to remove the entire roof, they can just make an incision in the center of the roof so it can accommodate for the height of the T-Rex, which is a perfect idea, and to add a glass bowl on top of it too makes it a more appeasing aesthetic. And they do just that, and the citizens go in to check out the dinosaur exhibit, and that's the ending. Now let's jump into a more middle of the road episode where the crew is gonna build a wheelchair ramp. And it starts off with the crew resting in their own homes. Then Mix charges out very ecstatic that she's gonna get her special purple paint mailed to her, which Omar is gonna be the one delivering it. And in speaking of, we see Omar playing some basketball with his children. Then he suddenly slips and breaks his leg, resulting in him getting medical attention. And when the pups notice that Omar is a little bit delayed than usual, they head off to go find him, and likewise, they would find him, but not in his normal form. Instead, he's now placed in a wheelchair with a cast on his leg. However, despite the impairment that he currently has, he's still resolute on getting his job done, so he's getting ready to deliver his first package, starting with Great Ways at the City Hall, and he's right in front of it, but unfortunately, because of the situation he's in, he's unable to enter the city hall because there's stairs, and I guess every place in this town was incompetent to not have at least some accessibility. So yeah, this is where the pups concept the idea to craft wheelchair ramps, which should have existed to begin with, and they get the supplies they need to make one, first destroying a side of the stairs and then replacing it with a wheelchair ramp where Omar can ride it up to the top and deliver the mail to Great Way. After that, he's got other mails to deliver around town, and the pups accompany him to make ramps so the entrances are accessible to him and he's able to deliver the mails. And his final stop would be at the bark yard, where he doesn't need a ramp anyways because it's straightforward, and he delivers the mail, which Mix knows belongs to her, and it's the purple paint that she's looking forward to using. And I guess as a way to thank Omar for delivering it, she uses the paint to create a nice graffiti art onto the wall at the basketball court, and that is the end of the episode there. Which, like I said, it was just mid. Moving on to the next episode, where the crew builds a splash park, and it starts off on a hot summer day, and the crew spends their time cooling off inside Motor's super tub, which was a nice callback to that episode. Then, Great Way pays a visit to them, where she needs their help to construct something to help the Billows Cove residents cool off, which I don't know why they can't just figure out a way to cool off on their own. They always need to lean on the pups. Anyways, the idea that rings their bell is to create a splash park for those citizens. So Great Way leaves to make the announcement of it, and the pups call Camilla on the screen to get the sprinkler delivered to town, and they have a selection of animal models they can choose from, whether it be a dolphin or a fish, but their official choice is a sea monster, which by the sight of it frightens Rubble, which is gonna be a gag throughout this episode, I guess. So they make their way to the beach, and they spot Camilla arriving with the sea monster sprinkler, which once again, Rubble is terrified by it, despite the fact that he should have already known it was a model from earlier. And then, just as Camilla was pulling up to shore, the sprinkler gets stuck in between some big rocks in the sea, which her boat was able to make it through because the width of it wasn't as wide as the sprinkler. And on top of that, this one line from Wheeler just stood out to me a lot, where he's like, here she doesn't come. But anyways, the pups try to get the sprinkler unstuck, and unfortunately there are no success to it. So they concept a solution that instead of trying to unstuck the sprinkler, just leave it there and build a path towards where it's at. So the crew builds a pier bridge, and once complete, the crew activates the sprinkler, which water discharges from it, and the citizens just quickly dash over to the splash park and enjoy themselves there alongside the pups, which is a way to conclude this okay episode. Then moving on to a funnier episode, which is called The Crew Builds a Playroom, and it starts off with Motor happily being jovial, and then she and the pups get a call from Omar, who's secretly asking them to build a playroom at his home so he can surprise his children with it. And to maintain the surprise, he and his wife take the children out for a bit so it can buy the crew some time to build that playroom. So the crew gather the materials needed, and they make their way to Omar's house, which after their arrival we do see a squirrel spying on them, which clearly is setting up something. And the first thing the pups do before building is to clean up some acorns scattered around the yard, which Wheeler happily does so. And just as Motor is about to use her wrecking ball to demolish some of the walls, that squirrel pops up and distracts her, and so do the other pups besides Rubble, who is tempted to chase it, which I guess the sight of the squirrel plays into the jovial stereotype that dogs would want to chase it, and in this case, the pups here are just unable to contain themselves from chasing at it. However, Rubble himself is trying not to do so despite the temptation there. He does recognize his priorities need to be done first. So the pups finally stop chasing the squirrel and they get back to work getting some process done by demolishing some of the walls and start to build the foundation of the new playroom walls. But then more acorns are scattered around the yard, which the squirrel arrives again, and Motor gives into the temptation and just chases after it, which causes a bit of a mess. So Wheeler opts to vacuum all the acorns, which he sucks all of them into his pack. So in that way, it can mitigate any sort of distractions moving forward. Which, are you sure if you're gonna leave the acorns in your pack? Which the squirrel does spot and makes his way down to get them. And while the brew is finishing up with the framework of the building, we get this very melodramatic scene where Wheeler turns around and gasps at the squirrel spying on him before it leaps onto his pack, which funnily spooks him and causes him to run away like it's chasing him when it's really just clinging on his pack full of acorns. And his pups see this and chase after him too, and Rubble's the only one just trying not to give him, and he somewhat does before he's interrupted with a call from Omar, who acknowledges that his family is heading back home, which adds a level of urgency to the situation, as the pups are only halfway done with their build, so they need to stop with their playful business and start getting their priorities straight. So first thing they do is building a home for the squirrel, so in that way it can seek a boundary to stay in that can avoid invading theirs while they're working. And after that, they finish up everything else in the playroom, and it's all set up just in the nick of time before Omar's family comes home, and the pups hide somewhere to surprise the kids once they enter, and they do. Omar is very appreciative for the pups' help with upgrading parts of his home. And then to end off the episode, we have a somewhat saddened Motor lamenting on the fact that she might not get to see this squirrel again. And Rubble acknowledges that that may not be the case as they watch out the window and spot the squirrel enjoying itself in the new house the pups constructed for it. And this won't be the last time we see the squirrel, so yeah, there it go. Move on to the next episode, where it's called The Crew Built a School. And it starts off with a fun, aesthetically appeasing sequence that delights my kind of nature, where Mix and Motor are making art, which is a self-portrait of themselves. Which, as an artist, I can critique that Mix did a wonderful job using some strong, charming colors to really represent her character in her self-portrait, while Motor adds more like paw prints to it, to her self-portrait, which is made in more of a simple fashion. But anyways, Great Wayne visits to check up on the pups and requests for them to construct a school. Which, how in the world in Builder's Cove is there no sort of education for the kids? But anyways, all the pups get the supplies and head over to the location where they're gonna build a school. And because they're building on the same day that the kids are gonna have their first day of school, this definitely demonstrates a lack of responsibility that Great Way has. So what she's gonna do here is try to stall some time before the kids can officially arrive at the school. And by doing that, she needs Juniper to help her out, whom by the way is Omar's wife, and her occupation is a cross guard. And she spends the next several minutes keeping the children waiting until the pups are ready. So next, we see the pups cause a minor mishap when water from underground begins filling up the construction hole they made. And when they try to use a solution to fix the little mistake, some ducks just happen to be swimming in it. So instead of dealing with the issue, they decide to leave it as to what it is and just build the main structure around the pond. And that alone is a very kind-hearted thing to do. And after that, they finish off the job building the school with duck theme to it. Then the kids can finally arrive to start off their first day. Furthermore, Mix and Motor start teaching the kids to finger paint on the wall of the school, and they follow. But I should acknowledge that there was this little subplot with Mix who wanted to teach the kids something with art, and this just fulfilled that. So that is it. The episode is over like that. Next up is the episode about the crew building a waterway, and it starts off with them making their way to Zoe's farm, and they pleasantly greet her. But unfortunately, Zoe's mood isn't on the pleasant side of things because her crops, which mainly we see are lettuce, have just dried up. And Zoe is unsure of what she went wrong with the situation, considering she's done everything that she's supposed to do to produce a vegetable, but by just some quick analysis on the vegetables, it is determined that the crops need more water to stay fresh. And to add urgency to this situation, Zoe is also inviting the citizens to come over to her farm for a farmer's market, and she does need these vegetables to sell, or else if they remain with what they are at this current point, who is going to purchase them? Exactly. So this is definitely a situation where a solution is needed in an urgent case. But now with the idea that water is just what is required, the pups get an idea thanks to Truffles just arriving after supposedly having a bath near a stream, which obviously the appearance of her and Wheeler being there, we get this little fun reunion between the two, which shows how extremely tight their bond is. Anyways, the pups head up the hill to check out where Truffles bathed in, and it is the river that we've seen a million times in this series. And also, we see Crunchy the Beaver's home across the river. But with the river available to them, the plan here is to build a waterway because, yeah, that'll lead into the crops and fill up as much as it's needed in order to stay fresh, which you shouldn't really put too much water in it or it's going to drown. So they start constructing the waterway and they get the work done and it's working out perfectly. However, there's always something that's going to happen, especially when it's this early in the episode. Because all of a sudden, the water stopped flowing and the plants are back down to drying up. And the culprit of that is none other than Crunchy himself, who created a dam to float the water into a little pool he made. Which, wow, Crunchy's stirring up trouble indirectly once again, which is starting to become a habit in his nature where he takes things without recognizing the consequences for others. First with the electricity, now with the water. They do configure a solution that can help both Crunchy and Zoe have a balanced share with water, and that is to create, I guess, a divider wall within the waterway so that way it can flow to two different directions, which works perfectly well and is also fair too. So with that, Crunchy gets to enjoy the water in his pool and Zoe can be delighted with the water now fixing up her crops. And then the scene cuts to the citizens exploring the farmer's market, picking out some produce that Zoe single-handedly harvests. And to end off the episode, we have Truffles join Crunchy in the swimming pool, which they're definitely having a nice relaxing time in it, and that's where it ends. So for the next episode, the crew built an observatory. It starts off with them just spending their spare time at their home. Then they are met with a new resident who had just moved into town named River, and they are non-binary, which is cool to see inclusion added into the show. But for their first introduction, they take photographs of the pups on a cell phone, which is definitely an adaptation from the modern society. And they show the pups the wonderful pictures they've taken of buildings, which happens to be the ones the pups made, which they point out, and that really impresses River. So then they ask if the pups have built an observatory, which they haven't. And they ask that because they've previously taken pictures of a shooting star, but it just wasn't the best quality. So they want to try and improve the quality with their next photograph. And that can be propelled with the use of an observatory. So the pups opt to help out and they make their way to the mountain so they could build the observatory. But they run into a bit of a roadblock in the fact that the only pathway up to the top of the mountain is filled with stream water. But they are able to have their vehicles push through the current of the stream and make their way to the top where they start the construction of their building. And midway, the weather conditions start to get more cooler and the day continues to start slowly transitioning to night. So they get the foundation done and they head back down to get the remaining parts up to finish off the build. But I guess in that time that they were just happening to load up the remaining parts of the observatory, the stream water must have quickly succumbed to the cold weather and has frozen, which the science definitely feels rushed there. And obviously because frozen water is classified as ice, it's slippery, so the vehicles are unable to travel through that. However, the ice is thin and breakable, and after a test from Rubble using a jackhammer on it, he calls over Motor, which he is able to get his message to her, but he's unable to receive any response from her because the signal suddenly shuts off on him. But Motor does come charging in her vehicle and smashing the ice with a wrecking ball. And now that the path has cleared, the pups are able to drive back up to the top of the mountain and finish the building of the observatory. adding on the giant telescope as a final touch. And to obviously fulfill the theme of the episode, River uses the telescope to spot the shooting star, and it has such good quality that they're able to snap a perfect photo of it with such high resolution. And with that, they appreciate the pups' help and they take one last selfie with them before the episode ends off. And then into the next episode, the pups build a zip line. And it starts off with them arriving at the local park and they encounter another new resident. And her name is Rose, who is a park ranger and is disabled. Which I like that aspect of adding more complexity to characters who are able to overcome their challenges. And Rose does just like that. But anyways, Rose takes the pups on a bit of a tour around the park and they would eventually encounter Crunchy, the beaver, which already knowing what he's capable of, I wonder what problem he's going to cause this time. But anyways, Rose leads the pups across a wooden bridge and Crunchy is following behind them, and when they make it to the other side, Crunchy begins to chew on the support beams that are made of wood, which causes the bridge to break apart, much to everyone's shock. Which again, this isn't something that's unprecedented with Crunchy when he does these kind of stuff. So the pups try to solve ways they can try and get across to the other side, and they eventually concept the idea to build a zipline, which I think is way more cooler than a lame bridge. But obviously risk factors take into account there, but that is more intriguing still. But there's just one issue, is the fact that they're going to need someone on the other side in order to help them, which thankfully not all of them was there at the park because Grandpa, Crane, and Motor was still at home, so the pups called them to help out with the zip line, and they gladly come over to their aid. So they first tied the first end of the zip line on a tree, but then they need to find a way to get the other end to the other side, which thanks to Motor's hammering skills, her hammer impact is able to swing the other end to the other side, and the pups are able to attach it to something solid. So now a zip line has been made, and the pups gladly zipline across the canyon. After they go, Rose goes next, which is like, Crunchy's right there, shouldn't you let him go first? And the pups do point out Crunchy is still left behind, which thankfully Rose was only a quarter into the zipline and mentions not to leave any animals behind, when it's like, you just did? Because I guess you didn't check Crunchy was right behind you. So she pulls herself back to the other side and tries to get Crunchy to go on her lap, but he's just too hesitant, and the pups get the idea to build one special carrier so it can carry Crunchy across the zipline, and that finally tempts him to go on the zipline riding in the carrier and Rose right behind him. And now that the two are across, Rose expresses how much enjoyment she had with the pups, and there's where the episode concludes. For the next episode, the pups are building a tea shop library, which sounds so random. But it begins with the crew gathered in the park alongside some children and Carl, where Grandpa is reading a book about King Potter, and everyone is captivated by the story, which unfortunately for them, Grandpa's at the end of it. So everyone wants another story, by how I describe it, a sequel to the King Potter story, but Grandpa just doesn't have it. However, the pups share the idea of ordering the books to the park alongside making it as a library tea shop so that there can be tea served while people enjoy reading books that they purchase. So they start getting to work, where the pups get Camilla to deliver the books. Meanwhile, they start building the framework around the tree that Grandpa was reading the book to them earlier, feeling like a way for sentimental sakes. So everything seems fine with the building portion. However, they are hit with some issues. First off, the tea that they were supposed to order have all run out with the honey flavored. Plus on top of that, there's a beehive inhabiting on the tree that they built the library around. So the pups try to get the bees to leave the tree, but that does not work. But they do have an idea to adjust with their situation by creating a safety glass around the beehive so that they don't have to move them. And two, since there's a beehive there and the honey was what they needed to make their tea, they can just use the beehive's honey. So they do all of that, and when they're finished, Camilla arrives just in time to unload all the books she has collected, and among them is a King Potter sequel book. So Grandpa Gravel reads it to everyone, as the library tea shop gets pretty occupied by a lot of the Builders Cove residents. So there's how the episode's resolution plays out. Then for the next episode, it's called The Crew Builds a Dance Floor, and it starts off with the pups building a dance floor for a dance event that they're gonna have tonight with the citizens, which the structure of the dance floor is just wooden planks because authenticity. It also is topped off with a clanging disco ball to add to the dancing atmosphere. Now that they're done, Gravel and Crane arrive, where the former wants to dance with somebody, and Charger is elated to do so because he's charged up for such high energy to dance. However, he does express some stage fright since he's going to be doing it in front of everyone. And this is something that I have a fair share of because stage fright shapes you to feel as anxious for how the public eye views your performance. And that's really understandable with Charger. And when he tries to practice, he stumbles a bit, which was kind of humorous. But anyways, while the pups are occupied with their dance practice, Wingsy is back on screen again, and she causes nothing but more trouble again. This time, the mayhem that she's gonna make is accidentally unhooking the disco ball from the hook it was clinging to, which drops it onto the dance floor, breaking it apart, and then rolls off. So now it's rolling around town, which is like, we've already seen something like this with the ice cream clone. Why do they have to repeat another sequence like this again? Like, did the show really run out of ideas up to this point? But whatever, the pups now go chase after it. And it's a pretty basic chase that we already have seen before, but a deal that I would like to mention is the fact that throughout the sequence, we got to see certain citizens who are also practicing for the dance too, so at least we get to know who is going to be there. But anyways, the chase finally ends at the skateboard when they are able to get the disco ball to roll into Wheeler's truck and he's able to load it in. So now they can go back to put the disco ball back to where it was and fix the dance floor that it damaged when it fell. And they got Crane and Grovel to help out, supply them the wood planks they need. And on top of them, they also supply a better hook where they dub it Wingsy-proof, which is like, you should have used it to begin with. And then lastly, the disco ball is obviously scratched up and dirty after the immense amount of rolling it was around town. And the man himself, Wheeler, comes to save the day and scrubs off all the dirt, and now it's shining again, so kudos to him. And that night, everyone gathers around to watch the dance where we start off with some of the citizens and then it's Charger and Grovel's turn, which he does express his hesitation, but Grovel pacifies him a bit so he can bravely perform in front of everyone, and he and Grovel are able to dance perfectly together, and Charger pretty much overcame his stage fright in this episode, which is a great way to close this episode off. Moving on to the next episode, which is a Halloween-themed episode, and it revolves around the pups fixing a haunted house. So Rubble is just setting some music on his DJ turntables. When he plays it, it plays a more Halloween-themed tune. Then the pups get a call from Greatway, who's dressed as a wolf, invites the pups over to a haunted house that she wants them to fix because she's gonna host the party at that house, which, interesting choice. The pups accept the plan, but Rubble does express his worry for it. Anyways, they arrive at the haunted house, now dressed in their respective costumes. Rubble's a vampire, then we have Mix dressed as a superhero in reference to the drive-in theater episode. Next, Charger's costume is a cheetah because that perfectly suits his character. And last, we have Wheeler, whose suit is a robot. And finally, Motor is dressed as a rubber duck because obviously. Greatway is fascinated with their costumes and she leaves the scene for the pups to deal with repairing the haunted house, which again, Marvel is still nervous by its description of haunted. But he still bravely heads in along with his cousins and they start their job with first repairing a broken staircase, then they replace some damaged window shutters. After that, they start hearing some strange noises, and when the pups all put their ears to the wall, the strange sound spooks them and they are startled by it, but they remove the wall to find the culprit to be just some pipes. So they fix it up and put the wall back in place. Then another strange sound makes its way into the house, which these pups can't get a break from it. And after spawning the shadow that resembles what appears to be a ghost, the pups start to run away from it before they run into a dead end. For some reason, I don't know why they couldn't find their way at least around the figure and head to the exit door, but whatever. For melodrama, we see that the ghost that was following them was actually Ducky, Greatway's pet, wearing a ghost sheet. And Greatway so happens to have returned already and is satisfied with the pups' work in repairing the haunted house. So now she can host a party with the citizens welcomed into the house. And the party kicks off and everybody celebrates a wonderful Halloween. Next up is the crew builds a bat house, which is just another middle-of-the-road episode where we begin with the crew getting ready to smash some pumpkins so they can make some pumpkin pie, but they are hit with an obstacle because when the smashing machine rises, it reveals that there are bats clinging underneath it. So with them in the way, they're unable to use the smasher at the moment because they cannot hurt the bats. So they're going to try and get the bats to move away from under the smasher so that way they can continue using it. And their plan is to make a bat house somewhere deep in the forest. So they find a spot and build the bat house structure there. Once they're complete, they head back to the barkyard so they could grab the bats to move them to their new home. So now that all the bats are seemingly residing in their new house, the crew can return back home to finish off with their pumpkin pie business. However, For some reason, no one checked, and it turns out there's still one bat still underneath the smasher, who's now been separated from its family. So that adds more to this misfortune. Motor opts to try pacifying the bat to get it moving, as well as dressing up as one, where she gets the pups to craft her own bat wings attached to a suit. And when she tests out her suit, her wings do flap, and the bat loves the aesthetic and flies along with her. And she successfully leads the bat to the bat house to reunite with the rest of the bats. So I guess we can say here Motor saves the day in that light. But now the crew can get back to pumpkin pie business for sure this time, and they smash all the pumpkins, and Gravel finishes baking the pumpkin pies for the pups and the people who are welcomed into the barkyard. So that was cool, and it ends off the episode there. Now coming from Halloween, we go to Christmas, and that next episode is called The Crew Builds a Christmas Show, and it's another exciting one because Wheeler is the central character for this episode again. And furthermore, it's another one focusing on him and Truffles' dynamic. I'm seated, but it starts off with him and Truffles practicing their performance for an upcoming Christmas show, which is them sliding in mud. And we have their final act be Wheeler launching Truffles in the air, and she does a cool spin move like what you usually would see in figure skating, which how ironic is that going to be in this episode. So then the climate suddenly changes and gets colder, and the mud turns frozen solid, which is now making it impossible for Wheeler and Truffles to perform on since it's so slippery. And we have Wheeler inspecting the issue with the frozen mud, and he comes to the realization that his performance is going to be done in front of everyone, and if he's unable to do it because of the circumstances, the show may be cancelled, and he just starts freaking out, which I found his overall freak out to be amusing, and I wish we got more of this in the show because Wheeler comes off very frantic here, and it's just all very humorous. But anyways, the pups give him an idea that he can just perform on an ice rink instead, so the show won't be cancelled. And he and Truffles like that idea, and the pups plus Truffles head back to the barkyard where everyone but Wheeler is gathering and preparing the materials needed for the Christmas show. And while they do that, Wheeler and Truffles are just practicing for a new performance that they're gonna do, which they experience different kinds of moves, but neither of them really approve of it, which is slowly demoralizing Wheeler. And I feel bad for him. So then everyone heads back to Zoe's farm, and they build a foundation for the Christmas show, such as the ice rink and the decorations. Once done, everyone is expressing their excitement for the Christmas show, which Wheeler starts realizing that he still hasn't concepted a performance him and Truffles can do, and he has another freak out / panic attack moment, which is so Pablo the Penguin-esque style. But his family comforts him, and they reassure that he'll be able to perform, and after receiving an immense amount of support from them, it gives him an idea what he and Truffles could do. The same performance that they were doing when they were doing it in the mud, but this time they're now relegating it towards an ice rink. So now the night falls, where citizens are gathered, and we see most of the pups do their performances before Wheeler and Truffles' turn. And once it's their turn, they do an absolute impeccable performance on the ice, skating around, dancing, and topping it off with Truffles doing a figure skate spin. And that was all splendid. And everyone wishes a happy holidays, which is where it closes off this very fascinating episode about Wheeler. So then we go forward to the next one, where the crew builds a sled ramp, and it begins with them calling Omar's children and showing them the sleds that they have made for them, which excite them because snow is said to be dropping by soon, and when it does, they're going to be sledding down the mountain. So then everyone goes to sleep because it was dawn, and then the next day, the climate made an unexpected change, and now there's no snow, so that means no mountain sledding, and that really devastates the children. But the crew knows how to turn a children's disappointment to delight, and they plan to make a homemade sled ramp that is as big as a giant. So they make their giant sled ramp at their barkyard. So they started building the structure of the sled ramp. Then their next and final touch is to create some mixture so that way it can resemble slippery snow. And they display it alongside the sled ramp, and it's complete. So the kids arrive to check out the ramp, and they are satisfied with the build. So they are ready to get their sled inside down, and only to then there be revealed that there are a few more sleds, which confuses the pups at first, only for Crane and Gravel to reveal they made it just for the pups themselves, which what a nice thing to do so the pups can have fun alongside the children. So everyone makes their way to the top of the ramp, and the kids go first, followed by the pups, and after that they go again, and there's where it concludes, which felt like a pretty fine episode. but a bit straightforward, a bit that I feel like there wasn't much of a challenge the pups were facing this episode. And for the next episode, we get another exhilarating adventure with the crew because we're having another pup crossover. This time, it's Chase, my favorite pup from the main franchise. So it's pretty cool that now he gets to embark on an adventure in Builder's Cove. So anyways, the episode begins with the pups making their way to the city hall where the citizens are gathered around for Greatway's surprise, which before she reveals, the first surprise for the pups is that Chase is visiting, so he comes and meets Rubble's cousins. Then, her surprise to everyone is a gold statue of the citizens in town, including the pups and even Speedmeister, who the aforementioned himself is not really happy with how he's being depicted in the statue, which is like, you actively caused that for yourself, since everyone condemns your actions for how poorly you do things with no redeeming quality to you, so why wouldn't they accurately depict you looking shameful when everyone looks at you that way? But Speedmeister, being Speedmeister, is not willing to accept the reality and wants to try and change it for the worst of it, and his way is to try and discard the gold statue and replace it with his own. So he distracts the citizens while he gets McTurtle to set up balloons on the statues, but then he gets attached to the balloons itself, and he, along with the gold statue, fly away into the air. And when Speedmeister sees what happens, he quickly withdraws from the scene before everyone else finds out, and they make the shocking discovery, which for some reason no one can piece together who the culprit was, when it's like, Speedmeister has to have done something with it, so at least put your suspicion on him, even though it was his McTurtle pet that actually did it, but still, he's associated with Speedmeister, so there is still guilt there. But anyways, the citizens all separate, leaving the pups behind, and because Chase is there, he's known to solving the mysteries, so there's a case that needs to be solved, and that's where's the gold statue. And when the pups do find the first clue, and that is a dropped hammer from Mr. McTurtle, Chase is delighted with their skills and assigns them detective badges so they can work together in solving this mystery. So next, they search around town for some more clues. And now that the pups are out of scene at City Hall, that's when Speedmeister finally returns, brings out a boulder to carve a depiction of his face. So back with the pups, the next clue they would find is a marking that's high on a building wall, which they inspect and find to be a gold smudge with a very unique pattern that it was marked with. And not too far apart, they would find another clue, the last one they would find, which is a piece of tiered red rubber. So to examine all the clues they find more, the pups have an idea to construct a science facility so that they can use the software technology to help analyze the clues more further so they can deduce the culprit of this mystery. So they get to work building the science center, and when they're done, they start deciphering the clues. First with the golden marking, which they can tell it was smeared from the color of the statue, but the detail of the marking needed to be identified, and as they go through some animals, they eventually figured that it must have been marked from a turtle shell, which the pup should automatically know a turtle who resides in Builder's Cove, but I guess they still couldn't piece it together at that point. Then they scanned the red rubber, which would identify it to be a popped balloon. And then lastly, the hammer that they found, which the computer would reveal it to be belonging to McTurtle. So now the pups solved that the culprit was McTurtle. So now they must go on a hunt for where he's at, and because they already pieced together that he has something related to balloons, they head to the barkyard to go onto the top floor of the tower so they can try and spot where McTurtle is, and they do see him floating with the statue, so they make their way there, and Wheeler also brings along a wind turbine so they can try blowing McTurtle into the right direction in case he goes awry. And they do make great use of that wind turbine when McTurtle almost floats into several buildings before the pups finally corner him at the Lighthouse, where Chase shoots his net at the balloons so they can stop gliding, while Rubble is able to hook onto the statue thanks to Charge's rope, and now they can return the statue to City Hall and McTurtle back to Speedmeister. Which is, speaking of, we see that he's now completed his carved statue of his face, which no one is even satisfied with because it's only about him, and he goes on a spiel about his work, which is like, shut up! And he does eventually spill out that he's the one that caused the disappearance of the gold statue, which so happens to be arriving thanks to the pups. And for further glory, Chase's net causes the balloons to pop, which drops the gold statue onto Speedmeister's statue, breaking it apart, and it was such glory to watch. So now that his work is in pieces, he and McTurtle are going to leave, but he wants to bring it home, which he's having a tough time at, and McTurtle definitely doesn't want to help him after he literally abandoned him to be flown away. So now everyone admires the gold statue at the city hall, and Chase is praising the pups for their help with solving the mystery. They celebrate together, and it's the end of the story for this episode. The next episode is described as the pups building a giant lemonade stand, and it starts off with them passing by Omar's children, Lily and Lucas, who are selling their own homemade lemonade, which was first served to Shelly, and the pups were interested to check it out. And it seems that the children's lemonade are actually really good and should be sold to the entire town. So that gives the pups the idea that they should build a bigger lemonade stand so they can attract more customers. But guess who's going to be their building competition? Speedmeister once again, and he chimes in to try and show off his own lemonade, which Shelly tries, and it's very sour. But Speedmeister thinks nothing of it and believes his lemonade will be better. Like if anyone would actually cares. But anyways, the pups get to building the big lemonade stand, and when they're almost done, freaking Speedmeister comes out with his own stand, which is really badly built, which is definitely not an aesthetic that would attract people compared to the pups' giant lemonade model. So looking at the aesthetic, Speedmeister decides to sabotage them again and grabs one of the giant straws to tip over the giant lemonade, and it rolls away, which feels very shoehorned because we've seen this kind of sequence so many times. But the pups chase after it, and they eventually retrieve it when it rolls around the pier. So they place it back on the lemonade stand, much to Speedmeister's dismay, and as always, exposes himself to be the criminal behind these issues he causes, as if he didn't do this stuff before so many times. So now the children start serving some lemonade to the citizens, and to make things more humorous, Speedmeister's own pet, McTurtle, even tries out the children's lemonade, much to his disappointment. So that's it. Next up, we move on to the episode called The Crew Built a Wildlife Bridge. And the episode begins with the pups at the park, accompanied by Rose, who are secretly monitoring Crunchy the Beaver, who is collecting sticks, and he keeps moving forward as he grabs more, which everyone behind him follows, and then he wants to get a stick that is across a road, and without hesitation, he quickly dashes through the road with oncoming traffic. So Rose is able to get the cars to stop so she can get Crunchy to get across safely. But seeing the inconvenience there, the pups try to find a solution to adjust to the situation, so they call Juniper, and unfortunately it didn't went well because Crunchy continues to go back and forth unpredictably while cars are coming, so it's not really convenience for her. So she ends up going back to her regular duties, and the pups find another solution, and that is to build an overpass so that Crunchy and any other wild animals can walk over so they're not disrupting oncoming traffic. So they get it done, but it's just a normal bridge. And when they try to persuade Crunchy to using it instead of crossing the road, he completely neglects it and continues going the more dangerous route. Which then again, the flaw there is the fact that the bridge seems to be lacking some sort of detail that would make it more appealing for like Crunchy and any other wild animals. And that's where Rose comes in and points out the issue there, which helps gives the pups more insight on what their target audience, which is the animals, want. Which, coming from a more business standpoint, is basically that they're trying to attract the animals to use their product, which is the bridge, but unfortunately, they didn't get the right insight, so animals wouldn't feel as interested to use it. So in order to do so, they must understand what the animals like, and that is nature. So the pups add some natural features like trees and plants and rocks onto the bridge, so that way it can look more blended with the wildlife. Which now doing so, the wildlife details now attract not only Crunchy, but other animals like Wingsy the eagle and the ducks from the school episode. And then the pups and Rose walk on the wildlife bridge themselves and are satisfied with the build, and they celebrate together. And that's the end. For the next episode, it is titled The Crew Fixes the Talent Show Stage, and the story begins with a stage being set for a talent show. And we learn that many citizens are going to be participating, and the pups like Rubble and Motor want to join in. Rubble knows his, but Motor doesn't know what she could do. And then we get the appearance of Speedmeister, who also wants to participate in the talent show as well, like anyone would actually want to watch his. So then the pups decide that they're going to do some adjustment to the stage, so they head off to gather some supplies, and when they return back, they get a call from Speedmeister pretending to be Greatway and making up an elaborate lie to turn the pups away for a bit. And when they're gone, Speedmeister gets to business with doing something to the stage. And when the pups see that Greatway is only spending time practicing with her duck for the talent show, they head back and make a shocking discovery, which is Speedmeister stuck inside a giant concrete on the stage, which if that was his talent, I would definitely throw some tomatoes. So the pups try to free him, first with Rubble trying to use his jackhammer, which is only getting small particles out. The most obvious person to do this job is Motor, and she comes with a wrecking ball and breaks apart the giant concrete and frees Speedmeister. And as always, he does admit that he fabricated the phone call just to turn the pups away so he could deal with his business, which didn't work out, so now he leaves. And the leftover remains from the concrete that Motor smashed is something perfect for her to use for a talent show since she's into smashing, and she can salvage all of that for her performance that night. So it's time for the talent show, and we see all the citizens show their talents, and then it's Motor's turn for last, and she happily smashes apart the leftover boulders, which Speedmeister so happens to be in the crowd, and boy, that really stings for him. And that performance actually won her the trophy for best talent, which wow, good for you, Motor. You can feel some great gratification for your talent, which I think is absolutely spectacular. Although the circumstances leading up to it can come off as pretty fluky, I still feel like she would have eventually figured out a talent like that, even if she didn't use the giant pieces from Speedmeister's build. So yeah, there it ends. And not really an episode that I really connected with besides the end part, but it's okay. Then we move on to the crew builds instruments, and it starts off with a band being set up by some citizens who are going to be playing in Sierra Sparkle's upcoming song performance, which obviously the news about Sierra Sparkle elates Charger, her biggest fan, and Gabriel gets a call from Sierra Sparkle, which I haven't mentioned that she is his daughter, so there's some relation there, but she basically tells him that she is on her way and Charger is more than stoked for her to come back again, and he just zooms all around the concert set, but his excitement turns into a disaster when his energy causes the structure he raced around to crash down on the set. It's already bad enough for some of the decorations to be destroyed, but for much worse, when he goes to clean up some of the debris, which usually Wheeler's the one that does the cleanup job, but it was nice enough for him to try and do it himself. He does uncover that the instruments have all been flattened, and with no instruments, there's absolutely no way that the band can partake in the upcoming concert. But construction pups exist in Builder's Cove, and because they build things, they can just build fresh new instruments. So they head back to their home and construct the new instruments, and they build a new tuba, piano, drum set, and for some better beauty, Mick spray paints the instruments so they can have more color and details to them in comparison to the last ones that just had a plain aesthetic. So now they head back to the concert set to deliver the instruments. However, there's still a mess there, much to Wheeler's shock, so he does his duty and does his cleaning job alongside the pups helping him tidy all the mess up. And they put the set back together just in time as Sierra Sparkle is now in Builder's Cove again. So she does her performance with the band playing in the background, and we have the pups join her on stage for her song performance, which is when the episode finishes. And I'll just say it's another middling episode because I didn't really care much about what was happening in this episode since some of the stuff didn't really feel as interesting to me. So yeah. Moving forward to the next episode called The Crew Builds a Giant Dam, and it starts off on a rainy day where the pups are forced into their homes as they wait for the rain to end. So Rubble tries to cheer up the pups by playing some DJ turntables to entertain his cousins. And when he's done, the rain is gone. Then the pups are given a call from Greatway, who warns them of an upcoming flood that could affect the city. So the pups concept the idea that they should make a giant dam so they could obstruct the flood from reaching the town. And they also get some sandbags to give to the town, and they do. And then they arrive at a canyon where they build the framework of the dam. And as they're pouring cement, they occasionally get calls from Greatway, who's warning them that the water flow is continuing to rise. So the pups try to make more security with the dam so it can ensure that it blocks off any remnants of water flow. But then they're hit with an obstacle, and that they've ran out of gravel material, so they call over Crane to bring over the gravel material to the pups, and she's got no problem to do so. But she runs into an obstacle herself, which at this point, this is too many issues one after another. So for Crane's sake, there's a giant tree knocked over onto the road she was going on, so now she can't get through. Which although the pups could just go over there and move it, I guess they're running out of time, so they must improvise, and they figure an idea with having Motor smash some rocks on the side of the road, and then they can use the pieces to blend them in Mix's truck, and it can create some concrete that she quickly pours onto the building framework. and the giant dam is done. And then we see the water flow reach it, and the dam forbids it from going any further. So the work here is complete, and Great Way arrives to praise the pups for the work. So they celebrate together, and the episode is complete, which was just by the numbers. And also, I don't know why they did not have much follow-up to Crane's situation. Like, would have been cool to see her impressed with the pups' work being able to complete it without the grovel that she was supposed to deliver. But I guess that is what it is. So for the next episode, the crew builds a Squirrel-Proof farm, and we get the return of the squirrel again. How lovely. And it starts off with just Rubble and Motor paying a visit to Zoe's farm, and they check out her garden of wonderful fruits she has harvested, and they're pretty giant, and one in particular is a big watermelon that she wants to save for an upcoming fair she's having at her farm. But then there's some trouble. The squirrel invades her garden and eats up all the fruits it can find, starting with its strawberry. And when Motor and Rubble sees the squirrel, they give in to the temptation and just chase after it, which does give them some time to try and build something around the garden to avoid the squirrel from eating more from it. So they get Wheeler to come and drop off some materials for them to build a fence around the garden. And that's the Wheeler cameo we're just gonna get for this episode, which is a similar vein with the Squeak episode. But after they build their fence, they assume it's gonna work, but then they did not realize squirrels can climb vertically up on it just like a tree, and it makes its way to snatch more fruit to eat, so that plan failed. So they try now secure the top part by adding a bent over slope that prevents the squirrel from going over the fence, but it is too resolute on getting its fruit, and it digs underneath the fence to get into the garden. So that's definitely getting excessive now, and it's about to go for the giant watermelon, but thankfully Rubble and Motor stop it in time. So to avoid this special fruit from being munched on, the two pups call over Mix to come, and she spray paints Motor's wrecking ball to resemble a watermelon so it can entice the squirrel to try it out and realize that the watermelon is not edible. And it does indeed take the bait, which it does feel a bit wrong to deceive the squirrel in this light, but obviously for the circumstances, it needed to be done to stop it from munching on the real watermelon, so it did. And now the giant watermelon is inside a glass case for the fair, and to make up for the squirrel's dismay, the pups construct a mini farm that's relegated for the squirrel so it can freely eat some crops whenever it likes. So that was at least a nice thing to do. And it ends off the episode, which is just a thrilling episode, but I do find it humorous that I realize that this is an episode that Charger does not get any sort of appearance of, while Wheeler at least has some kind of cameo, which is good in a way because I like him. But that was just not the same for Charger, who got nothing from this episode, and I feel bad for fans of his who watch an episode where he's completely neglected from any content of or any sort of cameo. So we jump forward to the next episode, which is called The Crew Builds a Fountain Show. And so the episode begins with Charger expressing his enthusiasm for Sierra because she's going to be performing her song that night. And he just shows off to the pups a poster of her before accidentally slipping and causing a dog pile with his cousins. Then after that, the pups get a call, and it's from Gabriel, Sierra's father, and he's at the stage where he's asking for them to upgrade the stage a bit so it can favor the aesthetics for his daughter's performance. And the pups accept the plan and they make their way to the stage and they start constructing around it. But then they get a little too excessive when they dig through the dirt so they can place the lights, where they dig way too deep, and I guess they hit some kind of like water pipe and it starts blasting water through the holes the pups dig through, so it sounds very convenient. So the pups try to stop the spewing water by placing some large red pipes on them. But unfortunately, it was too late for them to save any sort of material from being drenched because now all the special materials they were going to use is completely soaked. But then, as they see the convenience with the situation, they can utilize the water combining the lights to create a fountain-like aesthetic, which definitely is something special. So they get right into constructing the materials, creating some water blasters, combining with lights so that it can execute the fountain effect beautifully. And that night, a crowd is gathered around for a concert from Sierra, and the pups activate the water blasters and they show off a visually pleasing effect which works perfectly. And Sierra of course invites Charger to the stage because he's her biggest fan, and that's it. Just fine. An episode that doesn't really stick to my mind by all it means, but still at least necessitated some thrill that worked to the benefit of the situation. Next up is an episode about the pups who are going to build a carousel sounds interesting, and it starts off at Gabriel's grocery store where he's setting up some peanut butter and jam, and the pups arrive there where Omar's family is also there too, but Gabriel is not open yet, so he wants to try and keep them occupied, which the pups have something that they want to install by his store so they could keep the customers occupied, and that is a mechanical pony where it rocks back and forth, which is something that the children would like, and they try it out and are having fun with it. But then Gabriel tries to take a turn for it while holding jam in his hand, and what do you know, he spills some onto the machine's gears, and it springs the pony out of it with Gabriel still riding on it. And for some reason, he doesn't just try and hop off it. Well, I mean, it is bouncing, but still, you know the optimal choice to do something when you're in this spot. But good thing is that the pups were nearby when they were trying to go back home, and they saved him with Rubble's truck. And then after seeing the issue with the mechanical pony, it gives the pups the idea that they can upgrade it to a carousel so it can avoid situations like this occurring again. So they can make their way back to the backyard and build the carousel. And they complete it with some help from their grandpa, and after that they return to Gabriel's store with the new carousel they're gonna install, and after that the kids go ride on it and enjoy themselves while Gabriel is finishing up his preparations, but he's running into an issue himself, which is having to arrange all of his jars on a shelf, which does seem like a very complex situation for him. So the pups get an idea, thanks to the visual of the carousel, that they can create a rotating shelf to make Gabriel's job with the jar arrangement easier. And they build it, which Gabriel is thankful for, and now he can invite the citizens to try out his jelly and peanut butter, as well as having the pups get their first taste of it, which they enjoy too. So wrapping up my thoughts, it's just another by the numbers episode with not much big impact it plays into, so yeah. Then we jump forward to the next episode, which is called Crew Builds a Parking Garage, and it starts off with the crew arriving at Carl's ice cream shop where he presents them his new ice cream machine that can make sundaes. That's cool. And then we have River skating by and finding interest in Carl's new machine, and they take a picture of it and start sharing it around town. So now people want to check out Carl's new sundaes, and pretty much the entire town make their way to Carl's ice cream shops in their vehicles, and the traffic starts to get a little bit hectic and are packed. The pups try to find ways to reduce this issue, but there's not a lot of convenience for them to decrease the problem that it already is, especially with the lack of parking spaces, which shows how much inconvenience this place has. So then Charger comes and indirectly saves the day when he accidentally falls back onto the sundae machine, which, looking at how it works, it gave the pups an idea that they could create something that can reminisce how the sundae machine functioned, and their idea is to build a parking garage. Not that surprising. So they go get the materials they need to build this garage, and when they're done, we have Omar's family test it out first with their vehicle, and the garage machine is able to rotate its spots so that we can open up room for the next vehicle to use it, which now, thanks to this new building, is now lessened the traffic jam that suddenly became a problem this episode. With that, the people in town can get their sundaes from Carl, and he does give some to the pups too, who were dying to try it. In addition to that, he made it a kibble flavored sundae so it could pay off for the pups' work in helping his situation. So with my thought, it's just another alright episode, I could say. Some decent conflict this episode, but it's not as big as it could have been. So there is that. Then after that, we move on to an episode where the crew builds a campsite, and it starts off with them at the backyard preparing for their camp out. But then Rose chimes into their home and delivers the bad news that the original location that they were gonna camp out at is now being overrun by a hazardous weather condition. So that disappoints the pups. However, if they can't do it there, then they might as well just make their own homemade campsite right at their own home. So that's what they exactly do. So they get to work decorating some boards to look like trees and assembling a homemade campfire so they can make it more authentic, and obviously sleeping bags so they can sleep outside just like how they would have done it if they were actually camping out. And when they're done, they top off with a nice meal from Grandpa Grovel, who cooks them chili. And to add on top of that, the most important thing about camping out is marshmallows. So then we get to these segments involving Rubble being so fearful of the dark, which, I mean, come on, nighttime it's always going to be like that, but I guess in this world, when it gets to the shadowy dark level, it terrifies Rubble so much, and we get so many sequences when the clouds cover the moon. The pitch darkness just frightens him. and even to the point where he jumps and lands into Rose's arms, which is definitely troubling the pups when they're trying to enjoy some activities with him. And at the final point where Rubble just hides himself in one of the boxes, his cousins can figure a solution that can help Rubble overcome his fears of darkness, and they come up with the idea that they should arrange some glow lights around the campsite so that way there can be light illuminating in the case that the clouds cover the moonlight again. And Rubble overhears it, and now he pulls a little 180 onto the cousins where he just jumps out and is elated with their idea, and they are actually spooked by him, which was a funny little role reverse there. So they go around to crafting these glow lights that are shaped like stars, and they light up the campsite, which helps Rubble feel less overwhelmed with his phobia of the dark. And they roast some marshmallows together to top off the night, and they are about to go to sleep, but Rubble encourages them to do a little celebration dance that they usually do, and when he finishes it, everyone already sleeps before him, and he goes ahead and sleeps as well. So that closes off the episode. I did love the humor in this episode, mainly just because how ridiculous Rubble was when he was constantly spooked by his fear of the dark, which did get a little excessive, but his constant phobia ended up taking the cake as the main conflict of the episode, more so than the essential campout location being unavailable, which was a nice way to add on top of that, in comparison to the last episode that mostly focused on one conflict and that was it. Now we continue on to the following episode titled The Crew Builds a Treehouse, and it starts off with Lucas and Lily at the local park checking out a nice tree, which they are then accompanied by Rose, who does run down the history of trees that they're looking at. But then they try out the tree and they see some of the branches are really old, so they plan to call the pups to help out, where they are actually cleaning up their tools at the barkyard, and Wheeler attempts to throw away an object that he thinks is trash, but then Gravel catches it and notes that it isn't trash and it's actually a handbrake, and he wants to keep it for better use. As we see here, he cleans it up and tries it out, which works, and his grandchildren are amazed with his work. But then they get the call from Rose, who asks them to cut down the tree branches, and they make their way there, which we continuously see the scene pan over to Charger's drill on the table, which I wonder what that would mean. So they make their way to the park, where Rose instructs them to remove the old branches, but also suggests that they should build something around the tree, which is a tree house, and they accept the plan and start constructing it, removing the old branches at the same time, which Charger does, which thankfully he still had his saw on him, which Wheeler would point out that he's branching out. So then the treehouse foundation is being built, and they're almost done. They just need to drill in the nails into the planks, which is a job for Charger, but when he tries to get his drill out, he realizes he doesn't have it because he left it behind. My goodness, the irresponsibility. But anyways, the pups begin to sulk about the adversity they're facing. However, Grandma Gravel comes to the rescue because he brought on the handbrake with him, so he can use that instead to drill in the screws. And after that, the treehouse is complete, and the kids start climbing onto the tree so they can get into the treehouse. And the pups are satisfied with their work, and their job here is done. So overall, it's just okay. I do really like how Gravel is essentially educating the values of reusing old materials, despite how unresourceful they look at face value, which is an example of the handbrake he saved. So this episode is definitely worth a watch if you want to learn some educational purposes regarding like recycling. And now we move on to the final episode of the season, which is known as The Crew Building a Chicken Feeder, and it starts off with them at Zoe's farm, where they're introduced to some chickens who joined her farm, which they find a way to climb around Charger's head as their way to introduce themselves, so that kind of sets the tone of their characteristics. So the pups are planning to build a chicken feeder for the chickens, and they do happen to have a lot of feed inside Wheeler's truck, but then they're suddenly given a call from Shelly, who informs them that the sidewalk has been cracked, so he needs the pups to head over there to fix it. And Zoe's okay to wait out her turn, so she lets the pups deal with that business first. So the pups make their way out, and when they are leaving, Will's truck happens to start pouring the chicken feed out, which I guess something happened. And while Zoe walks away for a bit, the chickens start following the trail of seeds left behind. So the pups arrive at Shelly's bike shop to help fix the sidewalk, and they smash it up to remove the pieces and then move out the cement so they can put the replacement piece on it. And after they're done, They are then approached by Juniper, who asks them to help her out with clearing a fallen tree on the sidewalk, so they make their way there and they remove the tree out of the road, so now they're done with that business. After that, they make their way to the barnyard where they place the fallen tree at, and then they return back to the farm, which unbeknownst to them, the chickens follow them to all 3 locations that they stopped at, and each chicken stayed at these respective locations. And the pups learn this when they return to the farm, only to learn from a somber Zoe that her chickens are gone. And after they sniff out the mystery, Wheeler discovers the chicken feed trail that his own truck poured behind. And on top of that, the pups get a call from Shelly and Juniper, who happen to report about an issue at their location, which so happens to be chickens. So pups decided to split up on this job, where Charger and Rubble will be dealing with the chicken business, while Mix and Wheeler stay behind so they can build the chicken feeder. And both factions get to work, where chicken feeder business is just whatever, but the chicken finding is definitely more interesting, and we have Rubble and Charger easily finding the 2 chickens at the sidewalk and shop, but there's still one more missing, and it so happens to be at their backyard because Crane and Gravel call them to report about their crane tower going haywire because the chicken made their way to the crane tower and started mashing buttons uncontrollably. And when Charger and Rubble get there, they see how the crane tower just swinging left and right, and on top of that, unpredictably smashing on the ground at points. So we get this somewhat over-the-top action sequence only from Rubble, who dodges all the crane tower attacks, and then the next time it smashes on the ground, he uses it to eject him onto the elevator, and he's able to make his way up and get the chicken back down. An hour after that ordeal, all 3 chickens are returned back to the farm, which conveniently Wheeler and Mix finish the chicken feeder, so now the chickens can eat the feed. Zoe is delighted with the pups' work, and they themselves are satisfied with completing all the jobs they needed to do that day. So that ends off the final episode this season, which definitely was more fun because there was a lot more action involved that made things more interesting. So now with all the episodes reviewed on, I can now get to doing a semi-ranking where I would highlight which episodes do I think is the best and worst from this season. So the best episode from this season, in my opinion, was pretty complicated, but the choice really came down to one that focused on Wheeler's developments. So I guess I'm going to be picking The Crew Builds a Pig Barn because please, I love Wheeler and Truffle's dynamic, and this was the foundation of their interesting relationship. But on top of that, the humor was also really good as well, and I just love how much we got of Wheeler developing his character in this episode. So I would definitely rank this as the best from this season. And for the episode that I find to be my least favorite / the worst, it's really not a solid pick, but based on how I look at it, it's definitely one of the more recent episodes of season 1. So after assessing them, my pick would be The Crew Builds a Giant Lemonade because I just felt like the storyline was pretty straightforward, and the sequence with chasing the giant lemonade rolling around town just felt like a shoehorned storyline just for the sake of dragging out the episode, since we've seen this so many times before with the ice cream and the disco ball, so why do we have to see it again? Like, come on. So I'll just have it with this episode. And that's it for my coverage of the Rubble Crew Season 1, where I obviously am fine with the spin-off, but for the season itself, I think it's alright, definitely one that had more interesting moments throughout it, which does make them stand out and ingrain in my memory, and some of the buildings that they made were pretty interesting to see, especially the conflict they faced during the processes, which some may come off as pretty middling while others come off more thrilling. So that wraps up everything for Season 1, and I'll get around to catching up with Season 2 around this summer, probably, and then I'll be now up to date alongside Season 3 that's currently airing. I appreciate every one of you for tuning in to watching this review on Rubble Crew, and I'll see you all in another video.